Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Charyupag, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on Sociology of Gender. Today we are going to discuss the module titled Transnational Feminism. In this module, we will understand the emergence of transnational feminism, and further we will also look into the relationship of transnational feminism with colonialism and globalization. Further, we will also examine the current trends in transnational feminism and feminist research. Further, we will also look into how feminist methodology is re-envisioned, especially in the context of transnational feminism. And further, we will end with a discussion of how there are different forms of feminisms in the world. Section 1. History, Development and Some Major Theoreticians. An anthology titled Scattered Hegemonies, published in 1994, marked the beginning of recognition within mainstream US academic feminism of a transnational feminist project. The editors Inder Grewal and Karen Kaplan stated that this project stemmed from a work on theories of travel and intersections of feminist, colonial and post-colonial discourses, modernism and postmodern hybridity. This work and others that followed arguably signify an epistemological break, possibly a conceptual vacuum, created as spaces of critical engagement of feminisms of color with mainstream US feminisms that necessitated the notion of transnational feminisms. This break was also from problematic notions of international or multicultural or global feminisms that had at various points of time gained currency within the field of academic feminism. These breaks in academic feminism are connected to two other turns that happened earlier in feminist theory, following or simultaneously with other fields of study, the postmodern turn and the postcolonial turn. The connections between postcolonial and transnational turns in feminist thought are not difficult to trace. Chandra Mohanty's 1988 article Under the Western Eyes, Feminist Scholarship and Colonial Discourses is considered a key text in transnational and postcolonial feminisms. In this article, Mohanty avers that any discussion of the third world feminism must embrace two projects, one of the dismantling hegemonic Western feminism, the other of formulating autonomous feminist concern and strategies that are geographically, historically and culturally grounded. This article is not about transnational feminism, it is about decolonizing Western hegemonic academic feminism that constructs the image of the third world woman as a victim who needs to be saved, as a negative frame of reference within the discourse of development. Decades have passed after the publication of the article, and this is an era of robust expansion of transnational feminism within the same US academy that imposed naive solidarity and homogeneity on all women and fetishized difference. Transnational feminism is taught and researched often in the way of studying the other and gaining global perspectives on gender. Mohanty's article since remains a foundational caveat about what not to do while representing and researching third world identities. In the same year as Mohanty's article, publication of Gayatri Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak mark a new milestone in developing an understanding of the post-colonial subject and subjectivity. Spivak suggests that the subaltern cannot speak, and her speech made impossible by the layers of hegemonic meaning imposed upon her, and in her later works she also suggests that a subaltern might speak and has spoken through post-colonial decipherment of their silences and in ways that they break their own complicity in being muted. Spivak works are crucial in understanding the location and implications of the transnational in terms of organization, exchange and representation of bodies that labor and bodies of literature. She repeatedly cautions against that moment when speech-giving and consciousness-raising projects of recognition, identification of third world women and others become one with indistinguishable from imperial subject creation. Thus, these two 1988 articles, not about transnational feminism but essential to them, could be considered conceptual litmus test to see whether current transnationalization of feminist knowledge reproduces epistemological structures of imperialism. Some questions to ask at this point would be: how is the third world being represented? By whom? Who has the power and authority to speak and represent and write? Who doesn't? Post-colonial suggests a formal end of colonial rule beginning in 1940s around the world and persistence of neo-colonial regimes established by corporate capitalism, globalization, cultural imperialism, conditional humanitarianism and aid, military intervention and revivalist nationalism. In the presence of these many forms of dependencies and dominations, the post-colonial has been problematized by many scholars and scholarships. It has been argued that this conceptualization is linear and dually oppositional, seemingly signifying clean breaks between the colonial and post-colonial. Productively acknowledging this problem has allowed feminist theorists to move forward and understand the relationship between feminist scholarship and colonial discourses, issues of representation, subjecthood, and subjectivity formation. Colonialism hegemonizes and homogenizes feminist and other critical theories, unpack and decenter the subject of inquiry and of ideologies, the actor and the field, and investigate the production of knowledge. However, there is an understanding that certain kinds of feminisms inadvertently, when meaningly or even consciously, further the colonial project of othering, speaking for, or orientalizing. Such feminism often becomes hegemonic, taking upon itself the task of distorting oppression as well as opposition. Such feminisms have been labeled as global or international feminism that assume a universal model of Western women's liberation and an ahistorical homogenizing universal model of Third World women's oppression. This problem of representation was not simply of the West representing or culturally consuming the East. There emerged issues of hybridity and unintelligibility of coherent political, sexual, epistemological, citizenship and subjectivities. Arbitrarily drawn borders, migrating boundaries and peripheral marginal positionalities brought to question the coherence of the subject of politics and knowledge. Hybridity and borderlands are notions and the states of being that can subvert colonialisms and hegemonies. They can resituate and reconstitute identities, resistances and productive ambivalence. A theorization of in-between spaces and in-between identities forms an indispensable part of the post-colonial and transnational feminisms. Identities are composite and shifting, situated and mobile, and therefore always contingent, always in crisis. Decolonizing and anti-colonial practices, such as those claimed by transnational feminisms, are always addressing this problem of representing complex, fragmented, hybrid identities as coherent, monolithic and homogeneous. This is where the notion of postmodernity intersects with post-colonial and transnational feminisms. Postmodernity in feminism represents deconstructive social criticisms aimed at the kind of monolithic modernity that, instead of generating agency and emancipatory politics, demands allegiance. Examples of such monolithic thinking could be nationalist ideologies, or say in sociology thinking everything through the Marxist lens of historical materialism. For feminists, such monolithic thinking is decidedly masculinist because it fails to include and integrate the woman as a legitimate subject and creator of knowledge. The discourse of postmodernism also intersects with transnational feminism to de-emphasize dominant identity-based studies. Instead, the emphasis is on opening up the field of feminist studies for identifying, exploring and theorizing about multiple identities, scattered hegemonies and unprecedented intersectionalities that a deepening global capitalism produces. Think about women from many developing nations, including India, traveling to wealthy countries such as those located in the Middle East to be employed as domestic workers, nurses and nannies. Many women from Asian and East European nations are trafficked as sex slaves and sex workers. The Russian brides phenomena, where women travel to the US and UK from the erstwhile Soviet Union to marry men who often insist that feminism has ruined women for domesticity in their own countries, is sometimes understood as yet another form of trafficking. The complex identities and experiences of these migrant women can be understood from a perspective of intersectionality. How their race, ethnicity, gender, class, location, dress size and other qualification intersect to create conditions whereby they can be objectified and exploited in a global economy. This is not to say that all of these immigrants exercise no choice in where they go and what they do. They often go of their own volition when economic opportunities are lacking in the local economy. Their families are experiencing poverty. It is hard to imagine women preferring to take care of other people's children while being separated from their own. It is hard to imagine women taking risks to marry a man several thousand miles away who will have absolute economic and social power over the immigrant non-citizen's bride, likely poor, ignorant of the customs and dominant language of a destination country. She will do this for the sake of a future that she doesn't see in her home country, and she will risk being abused and alienated in the hands of strangers, ranging from immigrant officials to her future husband who has paid her passage. The legal term for immigrants in the United States is alien. You can be a legal or an illegal alien, expressions that fit perfectly with what most immigrants experience. Choice, therefore, is a problematic term often used to cover experiences of disempowerment and desperation. Forms of analysis that understands identity as intersectional, unstable, fragmented, and historical or local seems conspicuously postmodern. Transnational feminist analysis displays these traits. Grewal and Kaplan state in their germinal work on transnational feminism that a discussion of postmodernity does not seek to justify or defend a pure postmodern practice as a utopian theoretical methodology. We argue that postmodernity is an immensely powerful and useful conception that gives us an opportunity to analyze the way that a culture of modernity is produced in diverse locations and how these cultural productions are circulated, distributed, received, and even commodified. Transnational feminist analysis often germinate from standpoints of postmodernity and postcoloniality. Current transnational feminist literature is rife with discussions of feminist epistemology and methodology. How can we produce knowledge while preserving epistemic justice? How can we research global phenomena while being locally situated? How do we collaborate with knowledge producers who are unlike us? The next section presents a survey of the current trends in transnational feminist thought, addressing some of these issues. To understand the connection between feminist methodology and feminist epistemology and whether transnational feminism can be categorized as such, it is important to reiterate that conceptual insurrection and production of a new feminist theory occurred simultaneously within the process of organizing women's studies as a discipline within academy. Philosophy, sociology, history, and comparative literature are some of the sites where feminist and women's studies were being done originally. Transnational feminist theoretical strains too are derived from literary and social theories, sociology and anthropology, as well as political science and philosophy. Feminist epistemology represents a subset of social epistemology, which is the study of social and political dimensions of knowledge, a field that gained currency with the development of sociology of knowledge. Contemporary feminist epistemology, perhaps as a result of postmodern turn in feminism, is in the process of becoming feminist epistemologies that represents multiple feminist attempts to reconfigure borders between epistemology, political philosophy, ethics, and other areas of philosophy as we come to see the interrelationships and inseparability of hetero for disparate issues. From what was a political mission that aimed to include women in the traditional epistemological project, a sophisticated critique of the traditional epistemological project has emerged. A critique that deconstructs and reconfigures scientific knowledge, reason, and authority. You have learned about feminist epistemology and standpoint theory earlier. Do you consider transnational feminist theory to be a branch of feminist epistemology? Does transnational feminism study how knowledge is produced in addition to producing such knowledge that looks at globalization and late capitalism critically? What do you think? Transnational feminism represents a movement towards and desire for ethical, accountable, non-hierarchical transnational feminist scholarship that takes one or more nations as a site for feminist research. Women's issues, movements, and resistances tied deeply to global and local processes are studied by scholars to understand varieties of gender roles and variances of gender performances. The transnational gender questions is studied vis-a-vis neoliberalism and neocolonialism. Collaborative and collective knowledge emerges as central to this epistemology, and researchers' self-reflexivity also emerges as central to transnational feminist scholarship and writing. If you are a transnational feminist scholar, you are expected to have deep understanding of the processes of global and local identity-based politics, displacement and immigration, states and civil societies. If you are an ethnographer, you are expected to be ethical and sensitive in your treatment of your subjects and then treat them as collaborators rather than as informants. Above all, you are expected to interrogate your desire for ethnographic study. The question of fragmented, scattered subject of transnational feminism remains important too. Who is this subject? The immigrants, the subaltern, the third world woman. Whoever the subject is, the woman or the man or the men or the transgender or the intersex, she, he, they must be represented on their own terms. The standpoints need to be valued, if not valorized, and relationship between them and the researcher needs to be made transparent. Many transnational feminist authors are US academics belonging to the diaspora, occupying a complicated liminal positions that Gloria Anzaldúa titles Mestiza experience. She describes it thus: people who inhabit both realities are forced to live in the interface between the two, forced to become adept at switching modes. Such is the case with the mestiza. Some of you might have experienced this dual consciousness of mestiza experience as you have moved to a different region of India from your place of childhood or growing up. This is an experience common in large, diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-religious geopolitical spaces that might or might not involve international immigration. This dual consciousness is central to transnational feminist epistemology. It is a source of knowledge and activism. Some basic concepts, section 3. As you go through this section, try to keep in mind the discussion of post-colonial and post-modern thinking earlier in this module. Third world. Third world is a term coined by economist Alfred Sowe in 1952, later usually applied to nations within the non-aligned movement NAM and nations that are seen as developing. Is a term that is often under scrutiny by transnational feminist scholars. What does this term mean? Now that Cold War is over, is it relevant? Who belongs in the third world? Why? Is third world a space? An idea? How is this world represented? How is this notion connected to colonialism and capitalism? These are some of the questions that partly form the core of transnational feminist thought. Chandra Talpade Mahanti, in a legendary article Under the Western Eyes, avers that any discussion of the third world women feminism must embrace two projects, one of dismantling hegemonic Western feminism and the other of formulating autonomous feminist concerns and strategies that are geographically, historically and culturally grounded. Yet with the idea of spatially grounded feminism, she also advances the idea of transnational feminism that must cause borders, complicating questions of home, nation and community. According to transnational feminists, the idea of woman or a third world woman with its attendant commonality of concerns, constituencies can be seen as colonizing move. How so? Third world woman is a category that homogenizes subjects for the sake of effective management of differences and administration of aid. It creates a relationship of dependency between the so-called developing countries and those developed through a process of colonization and institutionalized slave labor. In the US, women's rights are often being encroached by means of restricting their reproductive rights, by paying them lower wages as compared to similarly qualified and experienced men, by sexualizing and objectifying them in media. Yet for many people, including the feminists in the US and the other first world countries, the notion of disempowerment and oppression is deeply tied to the image of the third world woman. This image is used to justify war and occupation. The Time magazine's cover from August 9, 2010 showed the disfigured face of Bibi Aisha with the text, "What happened if we leave Afghanistan?" shows media complicity in what Spivak has described as white men saving brown women from brown men. Considering the colonizing implications of the term third world, its dichotomizing tendencies are also brought into question in transnational feminism. The third and first binary does not allow for nuanced investigation into global problems. The binary constructs third world as events as traditional, cultural, which is just another way to perpetuate culturally chauvinistic, ethnocentric colonialism. It is important, especially for feminists, to understand the general structures that mediate border crossings of iconic representative issues. Philosopher Uma Narayan discusses sati as a representative issue that stirs global imagination. She studies Mary Daly's work, where Daly justifies and draws from Keithan Mayo's racist work, Mother India, as an instance of Western feminist scholarship replicating a colonialist stance. Mayo, as well as Daly's work, is ahistorical, unnuanced and totalizing, with the lack of detail that leaves out the political purposes of the debates on sati in the colonial era, debates involving Hindu rationalists, secular social reformers, women active in the public sphere and British officials. Practices of sati, not something that happened everywhere in India, is tied to the economics and politics of sati. Questions of inheritance, for instance, who pays for the widow expenses, and any feminist scholarship needs to recognize such politics before passing well-meaning, albeit erroneous judgments on the evils of religious traditions, patriarchal tyranny, or traditional practices. Religion and tradition are the terms that need to be unpacked from their anthropological colonialist frames to reveal the underlying political and economic desires. Sati and dowry mothers coalesce in the minds of the Western audience, academic or otherwise, as one and the same thing, invoking a notion of death by the third world culture. More recently, we have noticed similar discussions about the widespread gender violence in India, something that became globally visible after the horrific 2012 gang rape of Nirbhaya in New Delhi being attributed to Indian culture. Scholars such as Narayan and Spivak have questioned the implications of understanding national cultures as homogeneous and innate. Constructions such as Third World, when tied to specific spaces, create historical oblivion and disconnections. The US has widespread homelessness, domestic violence, food and job insecurity. Yes, it is rarely described as the Third World. Collaboration. Transnational feminist methodology claims to embrace the cause of social justice and social transformation. In doing so, collaboration emerges in the scholarships as choices methodology of fieldwork. Theory of collaboration is gendered as a praxis, that is, what matters in this intellectual political journey is not just theory as a product but also activity of knowledge production, especially as a site for negotiating difference in power. Therefore, collaboration between academics and non-academics, activists and other knowledge workers, scholars from the West and the non-West is encouraged as crucial praxis within transnational feminism. Collaboration is meant to democratize knowledge production, displace Eurocentrism, and focus on the experience of subjects as significant component of feminist scholarship. Research collaboration and collaborative writing practices have evolved within transnational feminism as radically coalitional collective epistemic praxis that acknowledges and annihilates symbolic violence of systematic colonial knowledge that serve to manage and oppress subjects of knowledge. Collaborative knowledge addresses problems with not just Western feminist scholarship but also sociological and anthropological scholarship. First, there seems to be a need to know about the other cultures, including cultures physically located elsewhere, diasporic cultures, cultures of minorities, which in the American context could be African American and in the Indian context Christians and Muslims. Second, there is a tendency to never question or investigate the politics of this need to know the other. Sometimes there is a tendency not to involve moral criticism in this interest. These stem from good intentions of trying to correct historical flaws of ideological domination. Refusals to criticize and evaluate silence critical academic engagements and cause particular difficulties for valuable discursive exchanges between mainstream Western feminist and Third World feminist. Again, uniform criticism such as Daly can be seen as coming from a position of ethnocentrism and colonization. It is a difficult position and a dilemma that transnational feminism grapples with. Academic and activist feminism. While transnational feminist theory is an academic phenomenon, it is also informed by global and local grassroots activism. Activism against brutal practices of capitalism, biopiracy, environmental degradation, racism, genocide, and other widespread ills provide fodder and feedback to transnational feminist theory. Transnational feminist theory developed in the tradition of many women's studies departments globally, springing from idealism and activism, connecting feminist theory and its application. Feminist theories often position themselves on the activism, academia continuum, and transnational feminists are no exception. They attempt to correct the epistemic injustices of previous and prevalent feminist and women's studies as well as other academic fields that use ethnography as a methodology, studying topics such as identity, representation, economic development, and women's empowerment. Activism is understood as a direct action or intervention to address or solve a problem. This idea is central to feminism, which is an ideology of activism aiming at gender equity. Feminist theory in general incorporates interdisciplinarity and conceptual unity, teaches critical analysis, assumes a problem-solving stance, clarifies the issue of value judgment and epistemological relativism, justice in knowledge production, and promotes socially useful ends. Transnational feminist theory represents ideas saturated with politics of possibility, a reactive front to the inevitable forces of corporate capitalism and neo-colonial globalization that is oblivious of or purposefully devaluing and exploiting the natural environment, women's and minorities' labor, knowledge, and images. Capitalist forces aimed at creating and generating surplus and sticking to the bottom line do not care for the study of humanities, protecting human rights, or advancing social science research missions unless they reveal secrets of expansion of markets to newer territories. Race, gender, class, nationalities, age, sexualities become categories of consumers, not intersecting axes of citizenship. Transnational feminist theory pushes back against this trend. To that end, transnational feminist theory and theorists consider activists to be knowledge makers, research collaborators, experts, and rightfully so. In this module on transnational feminisms, we looked into the relationship of transnational feminism with colonialism and globalization. We have also understood how academic and activist feminisms have really led to the shaping of feminisms in the world. Further, we have also looked into collaborative knowledge and making processes in the world, and we have also problematized the concept of third world, and we have also looked into the issues and problems of politics of representation. Thank you.